Okay, so recall from the lecture that we talked about 4 different types of statements when it comes involved with software development. There's the functional requirement. This is something that the software must do. And we can kind of see that here. This is like the background task manager shall display some status message at some interval. Okay, that's some function, that's some feature that's being explicitly stated. Another thing is a non-functional requirement. And non-functional requirement is something that's like some quality that the software must have or some attribute that it must serve. And we can look at something like software registration shall be easy and short, right? Now that's not actually articulating any kind of functionality. What that's saying is that when you do register, it's got to be easy, right? So, and then another type of statement is this notion of a constraint. And what a constraint is, you can think of it like a global requirement on the entire context of the software development effort, including the project. And so we can see some constraints here. We can see like the software project has a fixed budget of 100,000. That's clearly a constraint. Another one is that the software process shall conform to the standard. That's another restriction on how we produce our solution. And then the last thing was assumptions. And assumptions are something that we're going to see throughout our lives when it comes to software development, because everybody's going to make assumptions. And what it is, it's a non-requirement, but it's some factor that may affect the viability of a solution. And so we can see a couple assumptions in here too. We can see that this project team will have access to some advisors. If we have to conform, we have the constraint that we have to conform to it. Maybe we're not experts. Maybe we have to have some advisors on that process. Another assumption here is that each employee of Star Software has an iOS or Android device, right? We have this constraint that the software must run on these, but that's the premise is that everybody at Star Software that this product is for is going to have one, right? So that's an assumption. And those are the 4 categories that are present in these 18 statements. So now let's go through them one by one and place them into a category. So this first one is the software shall be made available at the beginning of the next year. Right? That's a global requirement. That's a deadline, effectively. And a deadline is a constraint. So that's a constraint. The next one is the software project has a fixed budget of 100,000. That's another global requirement. That's another constraint. Each employee of Star Software has an iOS or Android device. We just spoke about that. That's an assumption that we're assuming to be the case. This next one, the software shall report to Star Software when an application error occurs. Actually, this is a very common feature nowadays, that we have this callback when an error occurs, so we can do logging and repair and diagnostics at the developer side. This is functionality. So this is describing some feature that the software will have. So this is a functional requirement. This next one is the software shall produce a schedule given the employee hours. This is another feature. So this is a functional requirement. This is describing something that the software must do. F, the background task manager shall display status messages in a designated area of the user interface at intervals of 60 seconds. Clearly, this is another functional requirement because it's describing something that the software must do. The software shall authorize payments within 4 seconds. Now, on the surface, that might sound like a functional requirement that they must authorize payments, but when we have that 4 seconds in the performance requirement, then that becomes a quality. That becomes an attribute. So we're saying that we're going to authorize payments, but when we do, it has to be done in 4 seconds. This next one, the software registration process shall be easy and short. Again, we spoke about that just a second ago. That's not describing a feature. That's describing the quality of a feature. It's got to be easy and it's got to be short. The software process shall conform to ESA PSS-05 process standard. This is a constraint. The software shall run on iOS and Android. This is another constraint. That may sound like a feature on the surface, but really it restricts the solutions that we can present. So in that context, it's a constraint. Experienced users shall be able to perform account update task after only 2 hours of training. This is also describing the quality of the account update task, is saying that if you get 2 hours of training, that you'll be able to perform that task. So this is not shall do an account update. What this is, that when we do that account update, it should be able to be done after 2 hours of training. So that's a non-functional requirement. The software shall not disclose any personal information about the users. Again, this is like an anti-feature. This is something that we're not going to do. In this case, this is a security non-functional requirement. The project team will have access to ESA PSS-05 advisors. This is an assumption about the development that we're about to partake in. The software shall only be used by employees of Star Software. This is another assumption. It sounds like it's a constraint, but it's actually an assumption. The reason why it's not a constraint is because that's not something that we can box in like a budget. I mean, that's an intent, that's an intention, but really that's an assumption that we're going to make that when we write this software, it's only going to be for these employees. The software UI shall look and feel like the rest of the Star Software product suite. This is describing the behavior and the look and feel of the interface, and so this is a non-functional requirement. The software shall be pleasing to the user. This is describing some attribute of the product and not some feature of the product. So this is another non-functional requirement. On Q, we have the software shall be registrable. This is describing a feature of registration. So this is a functional requirement. And then each stakeholder will be available during the development of an effort. Here we're making the assumption that we'll have access to the appropriate stakeholders as we're developing the software.